somewhat like Frank. That we all feel the sorrow of appreciate the song, especially No Tears in Heaven. Bryson led, there are tears until we all get into that place in that wonderful moment with Him. I literally get there those moments because I did a really good job. I had pictures and everything was powerful. People from here let me down. And I'm tempted to switch gears because my heart's not here this morning. It's over just off the Ridge Avenue with the family. So there. I almost walked up to Frank and said, "You got it this morning. I'm going over there." But when I look at and I think of the lesson for this morning, I think it's very appropriate. I'm probably going to look at it in somewhat of an abbreviated fashion just because of time this morning. There in Exodus, when you find, let me introduce you to Moses for a moment. We have an individual there in Moses as you look at him and as God has called him. As you start in chapter 3, verse 11, if you'll flip back, at least it is in my Bible, just one page. God's appeared to him in the burning bush, and as he's speaking to him, he's trying to get his attention, and then he starts asking him questions. In chapter 11, it says, "Come now, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh," verse 10, "that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." You know, sometimes God has an agenda for us, and it's not our agenda. And the first thing, Moses looks at him and says, "Who am I?" You know, I'm unworthy. In verse 13, after God explains to him, "I'll be with you," Moses says, "Indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is your name? What shall I say to them?" He's unknown. I don't know. You look at chapter 4, verse 1. "Suppose they will not believe me or listen to me, to my voice. The Lord has not appeared to you." So I got to have some kind of a power, legitimate reason to come to this. I'm unauthorized. And then he's over in chapter 4, verse 10. Then Moses said, "O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." I'm unable. And then in verse 13, he said, "O my Lord, please send by the hand of whomever else you may send." I've got a little book in my library. I love here I am, send Aaron. I'm unwilling. Now, in any one of those 5 places, we can find ourselves if an opportunity arises, right? Unworthy, unknown, unauthorized, unable, or unwilling. And I think way too many times it's the last one. Because God will come to us, or a situation will make itself available, and all of a sudden, and I love when you get into chapter 4, and when you look at Moses, and there's that moment there in chapter 4 that we've already done. What is in your hand? God never asks of us more than we have. He just wants us to use what He's given us. That's a great moment. The video of that moment is priceless. Here is Moses with the staff that he's used. In fact, let me give you a little journey there. I made a list here. Yeah. That same staff that he takes and he throws down, and you're not going to have time to jot all these down. If you want this list later, I'll give it to you. Chapter 7, verse 12, it's used to confront the Egyptian soothsayers, the magicians. In chapter 7, 17 through 20, it turns the waters of Egypt to blood. In chapter 8, verse 5, it brings the plague of frogs. In 8:16, it brings the plague of lice. In 9:23, it brings thunder and hail. 10:13, it calls and blows in the plague of the locust. 14:16, it starts the parting of the Red Sea. 14:27, it delivers them and drowns the army of Pharaoh and his army. And in 17:5, it brings water from a rock in the desert. A simple shepherd's staff. What is in your hand? Moses didn't know what he had. Did not know what he had. And he really didn't know what he had when he threw it down and it turned into a serpent. Did you read that text? Moses did the same thing most of us would do. He threw it down and he said, wow, I'm going to walk right up there and grab it. Did you read the text? What did the text say? He fled from it. Now, I was raised on a farm. There are good snakes and bad snakes. I'm a little different than some folks. Some of you say, no, the only good snake is a dead snake, right? Yeah, that's not true. I know for some of you it is. I understand that. I understand that. And Moses evidently was of that same thought. I don't want to be near what I just had in my hand. Keep that thought in mind as we kind of travel through. Flip over to Judges chapter 3 with me. It's unique what we find to use, or what God lets us use for His glory. Just one verse, chapter 3, verse 31. After him, and these are all the judges and the various situations where God uses particular people to deliver the children of Israel when they've made a bad decision and He's taken them captive. Chapter 3:31, Shamgar, the son of Anath, this is all we know, who killed 600 men of the Philistines with an ox goad. And he also delivered Israel. Now, an ox goad is somewhat similar in pictorial form to a shepherd's staff, although an ox goad has a point on the end of it. It's just a shaft of wood. But there are several different ones that have been rendered by artists, but most likely in the days that this would have occurred, it would have been just a piece of wood that was sharpened on one end, and it was an ox goad. You know what that is? It's to goad the ox. It's to get the ox to go where you want him to go. If you look at him and kind of trying to get him to move somewhere, if you walk up to him and poke him in the rear quarter section, he'll move. 600. Now, let me take you back. The Philistines didn't have ox goads. Spears, shields, swords, arrows, fully equipped. One of the things you're going to notice about each one of these moments, whatever somebody has in their hand that God uses, you see, in this particular case, it's not about the ability. It's not about the ability. See, I'd love to look over here and so let you see that now. Because when you look at the ability of that ox goad, it was designed for one purpose, and all of a sudden God lets Shamgar use it for another. Look at 1 Samuel 17. Some of these stories, you immediately think of, oh, I know that story. 1 Samuel 17, David. You know what he had in his hand? He comes up to King Saul, and King Saul says, well, I'm going to give you something different. Appearance here came on you. And you get this image of David, and remember Goliath, head and shoulders above everybody else, probably a foot and a half taller than anybody around. That's kind of the description we have, at least as we kind of figure out the measurements. And David puts on his armor, and he doesn't walk out, he kind of, and he can't move, he can't function, but he's got on something that's been used by someone else that's very powerful and would prepare him, except he said, no, I'll just take what I have. My little sling, 5 smooth stones, and he goes up against an individual and he conquers him. It's not about appearance. Look at chapter 21 of Luke, verses 1 through 4. Luke 21, verses 1 through 4. He looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. He saw also a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites. So he said, truly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all. For all these out of their abundance have put in offerings for God, but she out of her poverty put in all the livelihood that she had. It's not about amount. So, but it is, because some have abundance and some have just really a little bit. Well, it depends on what you're willing to give. We kind of talked about this morning in the class. If a need arises, what am I willing to do? What am I willing to give? What am I willing to let go of for God? What have I got? That's all God asks. That's all He wants. Look at John 6. Really, another situation, and this one's kind of unusual in the sense of what do you have in your hand. Luke 6. We'll start verse 5, chapter 6, verse 5. Then Jesus lifted up His eyes And seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. I can't emphasize that little signature point a minute. God always knows what He's going to do. He just wants us to be a part of it. He's given us an opportunity, given the disciples an opportunity. 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. Now, I don't know if they had that in the kitty or not. Judas had the bag. They're individuals making contributions to them, taking care of them. They're fishing, they're selling. There's some things going on. They have some money. Is he saying, well, what we've got's not enough to give just a little bit to everybody that's here? One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many?" We don't have a lot of detail about this little guy. 5 loaves, 2 fish, probably little loaves about like this, 2 small fish that he brought. He'd packed his lunch. He'd prepared. Everybody else not ready. It's not about ability. When you think of him and what God can do sometimes, all he intended for that day was for himself. We've always thought about it from the perspective of the disciples going, whoa, look what Jesus was able to do. We've always thought about it from the multitude's perspective. I wonder how many of them even were aware of the whole thing as kind of how it's breaking out. Well, evidently most of them are, because there's a later event, and then he actually looks at them later and says, "You all are only coming back because I'm feeding you. It's not because of what you can learn or what you can gain, spiritually speaking." What about from the little boy's perspective? Look what Jesus and I did. I thought that was just for me. But it was for everybody. Well, in reality, that's the way God uses us today. Whatever we have. What's in your hand? I thought about, see, some of you have an iPad, a phone, a Bible, a child. Just before Margaret got to where she couldn't communicate, I was visiting her one day, and this is being recorded, so I'm going to remind Patsy and Mike. There's something I've been meaning to tell you. Many of you know maybe where I'm headed with this. Margaret did something, and most people didn't even have an idea that she did. Special events, special occasions. She made blankets and beautiful. She said, "Next time Hillary is here, I want y'all to come over and I want Hillary to pick out something for Nora." She didn't say Nora, didn't know the name at that time, but for the baby. What's in your hand? What can you do for someone? So it can either be a burden or a blessing. Sometimes we can say, "Boy, I got a good meal here." You want me to do what with it? You see, that staff had been good to Moses through the years. He never expresses it the same way that David talks about his stones and his sling, or the staff even that David had said, "He's delivered me from the bear, he's delivered me from the lion, he'll deliver me from this Philistine." Moses hadn't had that type of experience. In fact, what's really unique about this, if you check back on Moses' life and look at him, he's living at his father-in-law's house. 80 years of age, he's living at his father-in-law's house. You listening to me? He's running from the authorities because they're still looking for him for the murder that occurred in Egypt. And he's being asked to go back, a wanted man and somebody that doesn't, but not until he let go of what he had and gave it to God. See, we can have so many things, so many opportunities, but until we realize it's God's. And I believe I can make this, when you lay it down and trust God with what He can do with it, look at the opportunities and the impact and the difference it'll make in other people's lives. So what are you willing to let go for God? What is keeping you from a right relationship with God? That's all I'm asking. Because if you hold on to it, it'll only do what you and I in our limited human frail capacity can accomplish. But if we'll lay it down and trust God with it, He'll look at us and say, go ahead, pick it up. And we'll go, well, I don't know if I want it now. Oh, go ahead. Because I'm going to use it and use you in a way that people will be talking about this for years. And you will make a difference not only in other individuals, but in nations. Margaret, what was in your hand? Whatever it can make for those that need it. This morning, maybe there's something in your hand that you need to let go. It may be some sin. It may be some situation. It may be you fill in that blank. It may be your very life, because that's what baptism is. It's that moment where I come before God and say, okay, I'm done. That's how Paul put it. He said, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. Romans 6 says it's a burial and a likeness to Christ, death, burial, and resurrection, and a new creation comes up, ready and willing to do what God wants me to do. If we can assist you in any way this morning, would you come while we stand and while we sing?